Sure, yes, most people in most circumstances should be embracing these kinds of tools in general, in some way, shape, or form. But to say that large portions of what you need to rely on in an existing product should be able to be swapped out on, if not quite a whim,
throw it away, man. Pretend like you never got it.
A very quick cadence, to me, feels like you're introducing so much risk and uncertainty that all of your stakeholders are going to say, you are bananas.
We're compressing timelines. I'm going to suggest that the reason why you think it takes 3 months to do something, and by the way, it does take 3 months to do it today, is it's the collaboration and communication that's required to do these things.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Basically.
And so what we can start doing today is automating or increasing the efficiency of that collaboration and communication.
They might be self-aware.
Stuck in an AI loop. Welcome back to another episode of They Might Be Self-Aware. The final, and we've said this like 5 times now, the final installment of the how we are actually using large language models, generative AI, and by extension, machine learning to do engineering tasks at our work and maybe on the side a little bit too. Now, the last episode, Daniel and I went into some depth on what we are actually observing happening in an engineering context at our jobs, whether or not 99% of all code is being generated by these large language models, or is it actually closer to like 2%? If you don't know the answer to that question, you're going to have to go back and watch that episode. I'm not giving it away here. There's no freebies. You want to know, you go back right now and you listen to that episode. But at the end, I was describing a few things. I talked about, I think, like large architectural changes. Maybe you should become a little more fluid about them, and some AI first development ideas. And Daniel was scowling the whole time. And so I thought this episode, I'd give him just an opportunity to either just launch a tirade on me or ask some follow-up questions. And then we're going to get into 2 more things to round out this series. One is, how are we using AI for software development tasks in our personal lives? Because we both kind of hack on things on the side. And how does that different from the more formal approach in our work to what we're doing personally? And then lastly, in this area of software development, what are we most excited about in the near term? So, all right, Daniel, how upset are you? Let's start. I need to prepare myself here.
I don't like to ever be a 10 out of 10 upset. Okay. I'm like a 3, but I'm usually trying to be a 1. So it's 3 times as upset as usual.
3 out of 10. That's the level of rage you have right now.
One of them is disagreements from last episode. Okay. One of them is from right here at the beginning of this episode, where he said it's going to be the last in this series. You and I both darn well know that it's not, because between episodes, you and I already have talked about, there's multiple other aspects that I want to cover. There's PMs, there's marketing folks, there's sales. There's so much that isn't just people who code for a living that could be benefiting from these technologies. And I want to talk about it. Maybe it's not part of this specific series, but we're going to get into it.
Okay.
Now, the other one.
Yeah.
This is what took me from 2 to 3.
Your personal grievances.
You and I have worked together for years, and now we've been talking both in and out of this podcast about our work. How long does it take from ideation to it's actually shipped and in production, a quote unquote major feature? Doesn't give me a vague ballpark timeline.
Well, I think the timeline is decreasing. So I would say, it used to be sort of like year, right? Because and why a year? Because companies at the beginning of the year, they come up with their strategy for the year. What's the big things that we're going to do? Right. And inevitably things slip a little bit. And it's kind of it's in that Q4 time when those big new features come out in general. And I would say that we're now down to big, and again, what is a big feature? But it's whatever it is in your head. Big features are now like every 3 months. And I think we're getting down to like every month, big feature. I agree with you on the once a quarter sort of deal. It's not because Claude couldn't
make some code that accomplishes the thing, you can do that in an afternoon. You can get the basics of that. But to make sure that all the business use cases are being done, to make sure that the UI UX has been fully integrated, to make sure that the backend folks got all of the database migrations done, that you're having the core of your code base integrate in that new feature. There's tons of testing and small releases and usability studies and this and that. And like so much of what makes a feature, whatever it is, it could be like, here's a new report that our software as a service thing can do. It's here's anything. It literally doesn't matter. But any large feature is so much more than just the code that takes in data, transforms it, and spits it out. And for that reason, I don't think that this process, until we completely remove people from said process, is going to get any better than about once a quarter for the big stuff, for small changes, for one little new checkbox or something. Honestly, even a checkbox has so much stuff behind it at times. It can be big. And the bigger your product already is, the more it takes to make those changes. So if it's like once a quarter, just to use that as sort of the time frame, anything that increases complexity or risk makes these things take longer because you have to do more testing. You have to make sure that your existing product isn't going to fall over on its face. Not to say that generative AI makes bad code, except yes to say generative AI does often make bad code. In the last episode, you yourself said, looking through a bunch of your pull requests or merge requests, looking over someone else's code, there's often like, oh, it made this helper function again. It's already over here. Oh, it doesn't incorporate these edge cases. Oh, it doesn't do proper this.
Yay, a new way to store a date.
Yeah, right. And so like, we can't just trust implicitly everything that comes out of generative AI code. And then this is what really took me up that notch, is you said, let's take huge framework parts of this and just chuck them every release. No, you can't do that, Hunter, because as much as these are meant to be something that you can plug and play, like MCP, you referred to the Model Context Protocol, this is supposed to be what says large language models can read this information and spit it out in basically like an API way where models are supposed to use them.
So we're not there yet in ripping out, every week there's the infrastructure changes. Oh, Postgres this week and some sort of document store next week, whatever. But I think that we need to start removing the stigma of making large architectural changes. I would also suggest...
Well, yes, but it takes time to change these things.
Yes, but you need to be actively working on it now so that you... Look, there's this question that I always enjoy thinking about. Like, whatever company you're working, assuming you have a job right now, take a moment to think about what will the company that one day comes along and just obliterates you, they are 100 times better at everything you do. What is it they're going to do differently than what you are doing right now? And the answer to this question is inevitably what you should be doing right now. And the company that obliterates us is the company that can respond to the market, that can iterate, that can deliver value faster to the customers. And I think that part of it is they're going to be able to adapt to the changes in technology, because technology, the rate of innovation is just it's mind blowing. And if you can't ride that lightning, I think you're going to get left behind.
At a very broad level, I do still agree with you, which is generative AI, large language models, AI, whatever buzzword you want to use, the new stuff that's been coming out the last couple of years is something that everybody needs to be at the very least familiar with, if not necessarily fully embracing. I've seen this in education. I have some friends in education who are saying, like, we're being told by higher ups that you have to start incorporating AI into your lesson plans or into this or that. I don't think it should be mandated necessarily quite yet, but to embrace these technologies, I think is somewhat necessary. And then, and maybe not for everybody. A different friend of mine said, well, what about the professor who's going to be the one that everybody loves the most? It's the truly fantastic professor who just has the chalkboard up there and their lectures are the sort of thing that everyone's on the edge of their seats and truly engaged in. That guy maybe doesn't need a large language model helping with his lesson plans. But for most folks in most circumstances, these kinds of tools can help increase your productivity. It can help take away some of the drudgery aspect of planning out the lesson plan or correcting homework or giving someone a personalized plan based on the kinds of mistakes that they make. Stuff like that. Sure, yes, most people in most circumstances should be embracing these kinds of tools in general in some way, shape, or form. But to say that large portions of what you need to rely on in an existing product should be able to be swapped out on, if not quite a whim, a very quick cadence, to me feels like you're introducing so much risk and uncertainty that all of your stakeholders are going to say, you are bananas.
We're compressing timelines. I'm going to suggest that the reason why you think it takes 3 months to do something, and by the way, it does take 3 months to do it today, is it's the collaboration and communication that's required to do these things.
Basically.
And so what we can start doing today is automating or increasing the efficiency of that collaboration and communication. And one example of this that I talked about in the previous episode is all of our engineering tickets are written by large language models right now. They start with some idea, but then the actual formatting, the actual structure, how we're actually communicating the details of work to be done to engineers, leveraging generative AI. And in the future, how we're communicating the details of what should actually be implemented by the generative AI to the generative AI is generated by the generative AI. So
I think semantic satiation, and that phrase no longer means anything to me. Say it one more time. Real quick.
I don't even know what I said. But what you need to start thinking about is, what are all the processes that are required to get everyone in alignment? What's all the communication that has to happen? And where are there opportunities to now? And there are definitely opportunities now to start automating some of that communication. Okay, here's the standard things that the backend team, here's the standard things that the, I don't know, our data warehousing team and our data science folks need. Right. Oh, here's what are the deliverables that customer success needs to know about every single new feature that comes out, or how does this change impact customers, et cetera? Because you should be making the best decision to bring the most value to your customers.
Right.
But in the old version, we made this architecture decision in January, and it's not actually the best solution now, but we're not going to change that again, because just imagine it's the overhead. That's what you're afraid of, is the overhead to make the change, even though you know this new technology would be better.
I agree that new technologies can absolutely increase productivity, and we've been talking about that plenty. But to say like a framework, there's a set of code, whether it be for Python or JavaScript or any other language, there's frameworks out there that have a whole bunch of functionality kind of all wrapped up together to help you with certain kinds of tasks. And I think my apprehension is that because we can't trust AI as a whole, we are then still reliant on subject matter expertise. If I am on the machine learning team, spoiler alert, I am, I'd like to think that I should understand as much as possible. Granted, no one actually knows how LLMs work, but like the rest of it, I should know what our code is and accomplishes. I am the stakeholder. I'm the responsible individual for our code. If it's running and it screws up, it's my butt on the line. And so to be responsible for it, I need some amount of understanding of what the hell is actually being deployed. Also, totally separate other team, back-end team, front-end team, whatever it is, they have a guy or a gal or a non-binary pal that is going to be communicating with me or my team or whoever it is for big new feature to say, I'm going to make sure my stuff talks to your stuff. I'm going to make sure my stuff talks to your stuff. Tests, back and forth, stakeholder meetings, et cetera, lots of refinement, lots of scope creep. And then 3 months later, you finally have this thing coming out. You could say, let's just have 2 LLMs. This one knows about their code base. This one knows about their code base, and let them talk it out. I think there's actually quite a bit to be garnered from that sort of approach, but you still need to have the people on either end who are the subject matter experts, who it's not just having more like knowledge of code bases. It's also knowledge of the business. It's also all of the non-documented meetings with stakeholders. And even if you have transcripts from your Zoom calls or whatever, I don't think that it's quite the same as the person who needs to be there to be responsible for the feature on each end of it. And so you can only speed up code so much. You still need to have the product manager who's on the call who said, oh, now seeing this, I realized that we need to add X, Y, or Z in. And you don't get that unless you have those calls with the responsible people on each
But
end.
what the product manager needs to be doing is creating the AI version of themselves. And whether that's just like, here are my guidelines, here's the 10 questions that have to be answered, here's the areas that I look for issues and concerns. And that takes the first pass. I'm not saying that's the final answer, but great. Engineering has a new idea. They feed it into products, 10 magical rules, which comes back with some objections. They answer those objections, or their AI answers the objections. Then when you have your actual proposal that's gone through the first pass, AI does the first pass of product management. Then that goes to the product manager. And again, you've compressed time. You've addressed all the obvious stuff. And what the product manager gets to then review, like, okay, if engineering builds this thing, will I deliver the value of this new feature that I've come up with? Takes less time, and it gets better over time.
I agree about the less time, but also, you know full well that any new feature, any new big thing that's being worked on, 2/3 of the way in, someone's going to say, oh, wait, we completely forgot to account for very large, important thing that nobody had thought of so far. Could AI help you think of these things more? Almost certainly. Could it help you address those when they come up? Also, yes. But I don't think that to swap out a very large piece of an already running engine doesn't introduce a lot of risk. Or even if it's not replacing all framework, like to say adding in a feature I don't think it's ever going to be an easy thing. And we're not necessarily talking about side projects yet, but I have a not horribly complex thing that I've been working on in the background. I keep alluding to it. One of these days I will actually release it to the world. And me adding in a feature to it isn't just make a function that takes in this and transports it into that. And then it has to make all these changes over here, and there's database migration. And I'm just the one person who's supposed to know about all of it. And that takes me what's feeling like forever, way less forever than it would have been if it were a whole team of people and so on and so forth. So yes, you can compress a lot of this down, but I don't think that we can get away from some stuff just takes longer to do and has more back and forth.
We disagree. Moving on, because
all right.
this would go on forever. Okay, so the next part is great. All right, you've got a lot of sacred cows at work, and we don't want to disrupt the status quo too much. In your personal life, when you're working on these side projects, are you just going crazy? AI's building everything, or do you have this similar rigidity of development?
Well, I'm curious what you'll say about yours, but for me, it is me working on the technologies that I'm familiar with and AI working on the technologies that I'm not familiar with. And the big difference isn't just that it's going to be making way more of the code. I still look over it, and looking at JavaScript is not entirely different from looking at Python. I just don't know the intricacies of how JavaScript works. It's rather, I'm not good at writing any of it from scratch, and I'm not necessarily good at debugging it or knowing where this problem comes from. So there's more involved debugging and way more of tell me what this code does. Because if I'm inheriting someone else's code base in a language that I'm familiar with, the first step is, hey, large language model, what is this? Give me a rundown of what each function is. Give me a rundown of where the data flows from and to, and what these helper functions are and whatever. But for my own projects, for something that I'm not familiar with, I don't know any front-end stuff. I still don't, despite having this working thing. To have not just something that builds it, but also tells me what it's doing. I turn off all the little checkboxes in Client that say, edit it on its own and let it just move on to the next step. I basically tell it, you're allowed to suggest the edits, and then I have to look over and approve each one. And I also add in there, be super explicit. Please tell me what this does, what piece of code it hooks up to, how it's accomplishing this. Assume I'm an utter moron when it comes to JavaScript, but I do know other programming languages. And when it does that, I will say I'm not becoming a JavaScript engineer, nor do I think I ever will be, but I have more confidence in what's happening, and it gives me more experience with what it is that whenever I see the bug that inevitably pops up, I have at least an inkling of an idea of where we should be looking to find the kind of thing. Because debugging is something that I've found that these tools are very good at doing when given the right information, but it still is a little hard to be like, load up the front end, start navigating through it, find the explicit, that one thing that didn't do whatever it was supposed to, go back, find where that is in the code, figure out the flow that could make it get into this state, and then fix it. If you can give it everything else, it then is very good at fixing it. But me having the context of what the hell this thing just wrote is so important to the speed of discover problem, tell it more about the problem and what it should be doing instead to then fix it. So it's don't just code. For my stuff, for the backend or for Python, go nuts. I have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. Edit the files. I'll check them when you're done. For anything that I'm less familiar with, I tell it go way slower and tell me everything along the way. And I actually read all of that. That's the big difference between my regular work and this, because I don't work with JavaScript in my regular work. That's out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I have to do it for my side projects. How about you?
My personal stuff. So it relates heavily to my work stuff. It's even more bleeding edge. It's experimenting with the things that just came out and trying to always sort of understand of what are the limits pushing. What are the current limits for generative coding and where do we hit them and what does it look like when you hit them and how can we best counter them and set up structure to limit the downside and I guess maximize the upside. So what does...
Before you get into that, I do have actually a question. This is what I want to hear first. Large language models are only trained so quickly and so often. Most of them are a few months out of date of all of the information that they've definitely super legally scraped from the internet.
Yes.
Which means if you want to be using generative AI to also make code with the up-to-datest, there's a new version of a new library that didn't exist 3 months ago, and this new version changes everything. So even if it had heard of it, it wouldn't know any of this stuff. How do you feed that in? Are you copy-pasting just web pages of documentation in? Are there specific tools that you use that say, scrape this one specific site to learn about this tool and its library and it's this and it's that? How do you use Gen AI with stuff that didn't exist when that model was changed or trained?
Yeah, so it's a feature of Cursor that it will scrape the documentation for any library that you give it. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, there's a library called LiteLLM. And it creates a sort of generic interface so that you can call a large language model, but you can call any large language model and expect this kind of same response coming back. Right. And they've recently made a substantial amount of changes. But so what you do is you say, here is where the documentation is. Please go right now and scrape it. It will go off and it will scrape it. And then when you are prompting it to do something, if you say at LiteLLM, it will just include the most relevant documentation from all of that documentation as part of your prompt. And you don't really have to think about it more than that. It will automatically reindex it for you, but you can go in and just trigger a please go out and scrape it because again, there's a new update. So that's
right.
That's my default answer.
And it'll hold on to that just like in its own little database. So it only has to scrape it once. And you can
That's correct.
Remember LiteLLM?
Right. In the future, just at LiteLLM, and that database of documentation moves between the projects that you're working on. So it's not even project specific. You move into another one, you can go and reference it again. You don't have to scrape it again.
Sure. Okay, so you tell the Cursor, which itself is a fork of VS Code, you tell this IDE, integrated development environment, the place where you do the coding, you tell it, learn about LiteLLM, and it'll just kind of hold on to that.
Correct.
And then you could say later, regarding that information, load all of that back up into your memory.
It usually looks something like, please follow the best practices from the at LiteLLM docs in this implementation. Or if there's some specific new feature that I want to leverage, please. I'm trying to think of something that they changed, the response types and the structure that they come back in. Please use their new version of doing this. Still, sometimes it'll use the old version, but that's part of it.
Sure. Well, people do that kind of mistake all the time. So this is how you get the information to do bleeding edge stuff. Now, what do you mean about really going like full bleeding edge? Because this is well into the territory of I'll just swap out, MCP for this other thing.
So that's what I experiment with the most. I think, and there's kind of two parts that I'm currently, again, heavily, messing with, playing with, and, borderline getting into the vibe coding territory. But so first is getting the AI to practice TDD, test-driven development. And I've kind of hated tests throughout my life as a software engineer and software developer. They've been kind of like the bane of my existence. I never have liked writing tests.
Same.
I know some people love them. I've never. So test-driven development is where you start by writing the tests, which will test how your software works at the highest level, and then you write the software until those tests pass. Because
how it should work.
Yes.
And so you tell it from the very beginning, if this input goes into this function that doesn't even exist yet, this is what the output must look like.
Yes.
And then you just then make the code to make the functions or the tests work, basically.
So if there was one secret that I had that I don't think enough people leverage in building larger scale projects that heavily leverage large language models to generate significant parts of the code base, and these are being commercial products, you need to have incredible tests. You need to have incredible tests so that when the AI broke your software.
Absolutely agreed.
And that's the thing that needs all the review. If your tests are good enough, you can be okay that the quality of the code being generated by the AI is subpar. It kind of feels like it's a mid-level engineer's work. It's kind of like, normally someone would do a polished pass on this, but if it's passed tests.
Right. So how do you get to the tests in the first place? Do you just take these AI generated, I guess if it's for your personal projects, you're not even having the AI product manager make any tickets. Maybe you are. But in my mind, I would imagine you'd have an architecture to begin with. You'd say with just some I've got a whiteboard and I drew some squares on it. Here's input A, process B, output C, database D. Do you start there and you think from a really high level, in order to accomplish this task, these are the 5 chunks, I won't even say pieces, just these are the 5 conceptual spaces that need or probably need to exist. Hey, LLM, start making tests, I guess. Because in my mind, you can't get to tests until you know each of the at least major to medium-sized pieces, because otherwise, how the hell do you know to test this input makes that happen?
So yes, I absolutely do just that. And I build a version of a product requirement document. Though my product requirement documents are very technical in nature, where I'm describing the feature that I think I want to build. And this often looks like me dictating it. Here's what I'm thinking, kind of stream of consciousness about this new feature. It's going to connect these services. We're going to have workers that are doing these things on a schedule. It needs to be able to respond to these sorts of things. And I feed that into, my default would be O3, which is an OpenAI model, and say, these are requirements for a senior level engineer to implement. Please interview me and ask me the questions to clarify anything that seems to be unclear. I get back the round of questions, which I also just dictate the answers to, and then generate my final requirements. So now I have the requirements, which I'm reviewing to okay, is this expressing what I actually wanted? Do I see anything here that doesn't make sense to me? Sometimes I will also generate a data model to be associated with those. It depends again on what I'm doing. But I often like to.
I know what I want in the database, right? I know the sorts of fields of this information looks like this, and I need this kind of information.
Yes.
Okay.
Because inevitably the AI changes how it wants to store things and how it wants to model whatever the data is. And most programs deal with data in some way. Changes. So I want that documented. I want the technical requirements documented. And so that's my initial source of truth. And that's where the tests are originating from. So then that gets combined with all of my standards, which are rapidly evolving for how do I write tests? What level should we be testing at? What are, again, okay, how do we test asynchronous stuff versus synchronous stuff? And you're just going to have to, I don't know, Google that term if you don't know what it means. But there are different things. It's programming. There are different things you have to test, and you test things differently. Which libraries are we using? So it's as standardized as possible. And then here's the next thing that I'm playing with a lot, which is, so you have this large task. And when you have very large tasks that you give to these large language models to implement, there's a very low probability that they're going to do it correctly, and they're not going to go off on some tangent and add various things. You want to break it down into individual tasks.
Yeah.
And there are
very much so, because if it makes one little wrong assumption early on, that snowballs farther down the line.
Yes. So there are increasingly solutions that just focus on that problem. You have a large task that you want to give the AI. How do you break it down into chunks? How do you track the status of those chunks? And how do you identify, hey, is this chunk too complex? The solution that I like the most, although I do not love, and there are competitors, and this one's free, it's open source, it's called Taskmaster. It's task-master.dev. And it does exactly that. You give it your requirements. It's going to break it down into chunks. It's going to give each chunk a complexity rating to identify, are there chunks that it should subdivide down? And then it stands up what's again called a MCP interface, but the AI can talk to it directly and say, okay, what am I going to work on next? What are the requirements for it? Tell me about it. And then it takes that task and it starts working on it. And when it's done, it goes back and say, okay, completed this task. What's next? So that breaks you down into chunks, but you start with your test, nail the test coverage, and then you can be much more free with the AI. And the AI will do a much better job of troubleshooting because it just checks whether did I make the test go green? Did I make the test pass? If it did, great. If not, I have an error and I'm just going to continue focusing on that error. And it still gets stuck in the AI loop every now and then. You need to stop, please stop.
Yep. But what you were describing there sounds a lot like what a product owner or scrum master or what have you might be doing, which is I'm going to make a bunch of tickets in a Monday.com or a Jira or a whatever that says, here is the epic level big thing I want. I decompose that into features. I decompose those into product backlog items. I decompose those into individual little bitty tasks. Start working on this one, start working on this one, and each of those has its own tests, and as the test suite grows, you can have more of that confidence that I was all upset about earlier of by the time I get up to the epic level being done, we've got tests for everything, and you could swap any piece out as long as those tests keep running.
Yep. And that's what, outside of that and wearing my Apple Vision Pro sitting on the beach and, vibe coding in VR, that's what my personal development looks like and how it differs from work.
When's the last time you put on the Vision Pro, in all honesty?
Oh, in all honesty. Probably like in the last 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
The only thing that I've heard about that recently is that people aren't using it. But what are you still using it for? Are you actually I'm using the multiple visual or virtual screens to do coding in it? Are you actually going to the beach and wearing it and getting some work done there? Or how do you use it?
So using it as a virtual monitor, but to be in those different locations. And so there are I guess a couple of beach-like locations, one I like in particular. And I find it as a helpful focusing mechanism to put it on, to erase the world around you. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. There's a whole bunch of stuff up here. Change the environment. I just have my screen in front of me. I've got some great music. I've got the waves crashing, and I can sit in there and the quality of the screens is good enough for me. The screens can get as big as you want, as well. You can put as much information as you want to on the screen at one time. And that's my primary use case. There are no apps that I love on the Apple Vision. It really is just a very high quality VR screen. If I'm looking for apps, I'm still going for the Oculus, and we get on a whole tangent. We start talking about VR.
And I know that I mentioned it last time we were talking about VR stuff, and this is not a VR episode, but what I will say is my favorite thing about having done one-on-ones or any other sort of meeting in VR is that it's almost impossible. And then you could call it's because they don't have enough features at this point, and I'm glad. It's almost impossible to get distracted and check your phone or whatever. You're sort of forced into the mindfulness of, I don't have 3 monitors with something blinking at me over here, and I'm actually reading the news over here. I'm in a fake beach with just Hunter or whoever sitting across from me, and I can't be distracted. I have to be present. And maybe we can talk about mindfulness in the digital age on another episode. But
all right, the last part here. What are you most excited about for this year? Is there anything?
Yeah,
on the horizon?
There's new models coming out, and they increase in sort of capability. But we're talking some earlier this episode and last about going one level out of don't just accomplish task, but that taskmaster thing you said as well, be aware of a larger context of the entire project that this work is a part of, or be two entire code bases that have to talk nicely to each other. Or as I also had mentioned, Klein now has a workflow where you don't just say, here's the rules. It's do this, then stop doing that, do an entirely second thing, do these 5 things in a row, then get back to me. Because the tools have gotten really good at accomplish this one task, enter, go. It'll finish that sort of task. To see larger, more complex workflows, there I use the word again, able to be done, I think is really exciting and a next step. But what excites me more than that is way less related to my coding side of things. It's at at Google I/O just the other day.
It's the virtual clothes try-on. That's the thing that excites you.
Yes, that's the one. No, it's speech-to-speech capabilities where these multimodal models can take in video or images or text or audio, and instead of spitting out text that then gets put into a text-to-speech model, it can natively output text, or natively output speech. And that's exciting to me because we're going to go from speech where you have to have like little emotion tags, and it's definitely gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. And I don't even know what I'd be using it for any of my personal product. I absolutely know it'd be for work. But to say someone speaks and then the model understands it and then can just speak directly out, reduces latency, is going to improve emotional sort of, I guess you could say like the facsimile of emotion, because it's not real unless it is self-aware, wink. But imagine, and I very much do imagine this because the company that I'm working for works on it, like an AI receptionist type model where you don't have to have it or have a long pause, where you really can just talk and in basically real time communicate with these kinds of agents in not just a text manner. We have the advanced voice mode and so on for like OpenAI. I think Anthropic is going to be coming out with one. Maybe that's what we'll talk about later today. And there's a couple of other examples out there. I think we've talked about Sesame a little bit on this podcast. That's basically just a tech demo, but wow, what an exciting one. And I think interacting with text with these models is all well and good, but having audio, being able to talk to quote unquote somebody outside of a coding sort of scenario is really important. The Notebook LM demo is so exciting because it takes...
Did you subscribe to the new $250 a month plan?
Absolutely not. No. I'm not even going to ask you because I'm afraid of the answer.
You already know the answer.
I know. But like Notebook LM is such an exciting demo for people to see. The exciting thing to demo, it is not itself a demo. It's a product. It's so exciting.
It's a deep dive.
Yeah, because you can take a lot of information, mush it into one place, and instead of getting a 1-page summary or whatever that you read out, let alone like 15 pages, which no one's going to read, there's this modality that people are very used to, which is listening to people, hearing a story or a podcast or whatever. And I think that things like Notebook LM or your advanced voice modes is, or this is, or that's, are going to become more ubiquitous and important in terms of conveying information to people in a way that's more likely to be ingested and remembered. As a quick throwback, as I described how I'm not a JavaScript developer, I don't understand what has been spit out, but I have it like tell me step by step. When we start thinking more about like education, let alone like early life education, but also later in life education, I think that being able to talk to something and hear like quote unquote a lecture or a podcast on it or just talk to somebody is going to make a way bigger difference in terms of most people being able to understand and retain information. So that's what I'm excited about. Speech to speech.
What I'm most excited about in the near term is hiring what I believe will be the first AI employee that I don't want to fire. And I'm specifically referring to a software engineer. In previous episodes, we've talked about the idea of Devin, which was one of the early ones.
But it sounds like you've already replaced a product manager.
Well, I don't think you replaced it. You've augmented it. You've made product managers better, but you haven't replaced it. You can't treat them like an employee. And I think that
product managers like an employee. You heard it here first, folks.
You can't treat the AI like an employee.
Sure, right.
But I think with the software engineer, we are reaching the point where you can treat them like an employee. So over this last week, we saw, the last 2 weeks, OpenAI came out with theirs, a Codex employee, quote unquote. Google announced their employee. Microsoft at Build, they announced that you can now assign a ticket in GitHub, which is where the source code is stored, to their Copilot, give it a task. And Devin has been maturing a lot as well. And I think it's going to be Devin that I'm hiring first. And Devin integrates seamlessly with the system that we already use to assign work to engineers. We use a program called Linear. And you can just assign a ticket to Linear. And there are lots of small tickets. They often come in from someone who, can we just make this small change to the website? And sometimes it is just a small change. Can you update this copy here? Can we remove this section or just hide it from people? I want to take those tickets and just be like, assign it to Devin. And
work, go away.
I am reading more and more about Devin actually completing tickets successfully. And so given all of the interest in this area, every major AI company coming out with their own solution, it suggests to me that we are reaching a maturation point where there's actual value to be had. And I am very optimistic that we are going to identify a subset of the tickets that we traditionally give to an engineer that no longer need to go to the engineer. They just get assigned to Devin. They'll be reviewed just like every ticket from engineering is reviewed. But I'm very optimistic. I'm bullish on this. But by the end of the year, that a real percentage of real engineering tickets that were previously going to engineers now are going to AI agents. And if there was an extension of this, I've seen some companies now starting to hire AI agents. And I think it's a little bit of a publicity marketing stunt, right, where we have a job and only AI agents can apply. But I think there's something, it's early, but I think next year, that's going to become more of a real thing. More companies are going to put up jobs for AI agents.
I also changed my mind now that I think about it. And we haven't had a news episode in a while.
What's your rage level? I want to check in on.
No rage. Okay. As long as we're not talking about replacing jobs, we're talking about augmenting. I saw something about Alpha Evolve from the Google folks where it was like coming up with mathematical compression algorithm. It was something to do with like 4-dimensional matrices being multiplied or this or that. And like there was a 50-something year standing best that just could not be bested. Lots of mathematicians throwing their lives at it, whatever. And that this thing that wasn't even specifically tuned to work on that kind of problem did it just like in a week or whatever. A long time ago, I remember mentioning that like GPT 5 or 6 was going to be where we have to start talking about personhood because something's got to win a Nobel Prize. If it just started going and no person told it to do that, and you couldn't realistically say, well, the team behind it is the one who gets the, like, no, that AI is the one that just cured cancer, or just did this, or just did that. Like at some point fairly soon, maybe it's as early as 2026, we're going to have discoveries that straight up can't be attributed back in any way, shape, or form to a person. And we're going to have to say, this was an artificial intelligence that made this discovery. And to see that, I think, is where we will begin to have a bit of a shift in terms of some really interesting, possibly scary discussions.
Well, I look forward to those discussions right here on They Might Be Self-Aware. And if you want to be a part of these discussions, please leave comments, leave likes, drop us notes, hit that subscribe button so that you know when new content is ready and is ready just for you and you alone. We love all of our listeners and our subscribers,
but especially you
right there, listening right now. Yes, we're talking to you. Ask your friend to listen. They won't hear this part because we have designed it so only you can hear them. Yes, the close
personalization,
the Emperor's new audio, something like that. Where can you find us? Pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, but all the major podcasting platforms. You can also watch us on YouTube if that's your thing. We won't judge. We don't judge here. This is a judgment-free zone.
That's right.
And we will be back next week with even more.
They might be self-aware.